Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the M5 MacBook Pro and compare it against the M2 series of MacBook Pros that Apple made and see which one is a better one for you. Now, there were a couple of different M2 MacBook Pros. They had the M2 Pro, they had the M2 Max, they also had the M2 standard one, the 13-inch one. We're going to be hitting on the 14-inch M2 MacBook Pros. I feel like those ones would probably be the better ones to talk about. But like I said, there were a couple of different ones that they made. Now, if at any point throughout this whole entire video, if you want to go through and pick up some of these particular Macs, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both these particular Macs. The M2 Pro MacBook Pros came out a couple of years ago, and these things were giving you a pretty good, solid type of experience. These things were coming out in two different sizes, a 14-inch model or that 16-inch model. And the thing that I really liked about these MacBooks was that the design was a continuation coming from the previous generation, right? So it was basically the same type of design as the M1 Pro Max, and that was something that was really good. They didn't go through and take away the notch, or they didn't take away the notch. They didn't take away the ports or the HDMI port or the SD card. They kept it all the same, which is really nice. And the exterior, both of these MacBooks hold up very, very well in terms of the exterior because they're both built the exact same way. They both have the same exact port selection. They both have the same exact thing going on from that side. The only really main difference that I can even kind of see is that the M5 MacBook Pro has one type of color that's different than the M2 MacBook Pro. That is the space gray color. So with the M2 Pro MacBook Pro, we had the space gray color, that normal one that came in. The M5 MacBook Pro has that space black color. So slight difference, it is much darker on the M5 MacBook Pro, but they both come out in that silver model. If that's something that's important to you, then you can also go through and grab that type of color. The rest of the bodies are basically the same. They're also giving you the same exact type of capability when it comes down to that display. So the display is 14.2 inches. They're both liquid retina displays. They're both also going to be able to give you ProMotion. And they have the notch. So they are very, very similar when it comes down to that side. There's virtually no difference when it comes down to that side in terms of that. So I feel like that right there is one of those things to keep in mind there. And that is a really cool thing. Even though they have the same displays, it's still something I would love to have on both because they're both very, very good. Now, one other thing to keep in mind here too is that when it comes down to both of them, clearly the M2 MacBook Pro, that one is going to be the one that might end up giving you a slightly older type of feeling, but that's only because it's an older MacBook, right? You won't really feel it because they both feel exactly the same. Now, one other thing, this is pretty important. As of me making this comparison, the M5 MacBook Pro doesn't have a 16-inch model. They do have the M4 16-inch model, but they do not have an M5 model. The 14-inch, the M2 Pros MacBooks, those ones did end up having a 16-inch model. Those ones came out in 2023, so that is going to be a slight difference right there, but it's not really going to be like a super massive difference, and it really is just kind of dependent on how you kind of take a look at it. So I feel like that right there is also going to be another one of those things, but again, it's not really like the biggest deal in the world or anything like that. When it comes down to some other differences, they both have Apple Intelligence. In terms of the amount you can spec them out, this is something that's really interesting. Because the M5 MacBook Pro kind of comes out in a couple different variants, you can either go for, the M5 standard one. There's only really one model right now. The M4 Pro, the M5 Pro, M5 Max, those ones are eventually going to come out. But in terms of the amount you can spec them out, the M5 MacBook Pro, you can spec out in one option for 10-core GPU, 10-core CPU. The M2 MacBook Pros, you can go up to 12-core CPU, up to 38-core GPU, and up to 96 gigabytes of RAM, where the M5 MacBook Pro taps out at 32 gigabytes of RAM. So that is actually pretty crazy. However, a big caveat, a big takeaway is that the M2 Pro and M2 Max, those were the top of the top. The M5 MacBook Pro is not spec'd out super crazy right now. I'm sure later on Apple's going to go and give us like the super insane Max models where we can, kind of spec them out a little bit higher. But right now, that's kind of what we get. So there is a chance where, the maxed out M2 Pro MacBook Pro is going to be faster than the M5 MacBook Pro. That's definitely going to be a better laptop I would rather have. But if you're comparing it kind of these two side by side, I would say that there's probably, these are kind of two different machines we're kind of comparing, right? One is a maxed out model. The other one is not the maxed out model. So kind of keep that in mind. Storage options, you can get up to 8 terabytes of storage on the M2 Pro MacBook Pro, where the M5 MacBook Pro taps out at 4 terabytes. So that right there can also be another one of those things. You might want to go and get a MacBook that you might be able to get 8 terabytes of storage in. I'm pretty much never going to run into a problem where I'm using that much storage. So again, it's going to be dependent on your, how much you want to spend on your computer. Another difference here is also going to be the battery life. The M2 Pro MacBook Pro is going to be giving you about 18 hours of battery life inside of it, where the M5 MacBook Pro, that one is going to be giving you about 24 hours of battery life. So this is going to be a very big difference here. The M5 MacBook Pros are going to be those types of MacBooks that are going to be giving you an overall better type of battery life. If you are wanting the Mac that is going to be a little bit better in that standpoint, definitely I'm looking at an M5 MacBook Pro as giving me the best type of battery life on that size, type of MacBook. Apple has made some really cool claims and really big initiatives on improving their battery life on their Macs. And that is going to be another big thing here. So they are going to be able to go through and give us that better type of experience. And that right there, as I'm kind of looking at it, that's going to be a really big type of advantage. But also you have to keep in mind here too, is that with something like an M5 MacBook Pro, this type of Mac is going to be one of those types of devices that's going to be slightly more expensive than a used M2 Pro MacBook Pro. Now, once again, it is really dependent on which MacBook you end up buying. But the thing I'm going to end up seeing here is that with something like an M2 MacBook Pro, this type of Mac and this type of device is actually going to be able to give you a pretty good type of experience, right? So if I'm going through and picking up a Mac or picking up a device, definitely something like an M5 MacBook Pro, it's going to be slightly more expensive. So $1599 on that type of device. The M2 MacBook Pro, you can get probably a spec'd out model with 32 gigabytes of RAM, a terabyte of storage inside of it for probably around like $1,100 to $1,200 in the used market. I'm looking at some in the used market, I'm trying to buy maybe a new one, and I'm looking at the M2 models, and it's looking like for a 32 gigabyte option with about a terabyte of storage, that's looking to be around like $1,000 to maybe $1,200 depending on the condition. So that's actually a pretty good deal. I would probably recommend buying one of those ones over something like an M5 MacBook Pro. But from a brand new MacBook perspective, you can't really go through and buy you can't buy like a M2 MacBook Pro in the brand new market anymore. You might be able to swing and buy something like in the certified refurbished market, maybe, but you're not really going to be able to get that from something on like the M2 MacBook Pro brand new from Apple anymore. So what I can probably tell you, and to kind of round things out, the M5 MacBook Pro is a really good MacBook. This is going to be one of the better types of options you can buy. It's going to be a beautiful MacBook. It's going to have a bunch of stuff going on within it. And if I'm going to go through and pick up a Mac, well, that's the one I definitely recommend people to buy. That's the one that I'm looking at. That's one of the better ones. However, Apple still sells the M4 models. The M4 model is very good still because you can spec that out even crazy higher than what you can on an M5 MacBook Pro or an M2 MacBook Pro. Those ones would probably make more sense to go and buy in some cases. But I would also say that with something like an M2 MacBook Pro, this is a better deal, right? Like if I'm going through and getting a MacBook, I can definitely go through and grab a MacBook on the M2 model, spec it out even more, and get an option that's going to be very good from that perspective. And that's something that I love having. Yes, if you get the M4 Max, those are going to be those are going to just be more powerful. You can spec them out higher, get more RAM and all that. But I look at something like an M5 MacBook Pro. I feel like for $1,600, it's decent. But I feel like a used M2 Pro MacBook Pro is definitely going to be the one I'd recommend more people to buy. So from that side, that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that'll mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.